sending people with guns.
I didn't realize I was so captivating.
How are you guys so deep into my content?
Everyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi.
All right. G'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, the podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. This is Max. How you doing, Max?
Fantastic, Pietro. Good to be back with a guest, first guest of 2023.
Yeah, we once again listened to the feedback of the fans. Sick of just our voices. We want to hear someone else. So we have got a guest on today, and we haven't had a guest in a while. We haven't had a guest in the new year yet, even. So good to have another voice. We have a very interesting guest today because now we are Victorian. We have been focusing more so on Victorian things, but Victoria's had its state election, but New South Wales actually has its state election coming up in at the end of next month, I believe. It's like the 25th of March or something like that. And we're always keen to hear from Libertarian candidates, and the Liberal Democrats, the Liberal Libertarian Party here in Australia, has got a candidate, and the lead candidate for the Legislative Council, which means that they are hopefully in a fairly winnable position. So we've got him on board today, and we're keen to hear all about him and his story and where exactly he fits in the libertarian world. So without further ado, I will welcome our guest. So he's also a long-time Liberal Party member and active participant prior to joining the Liberal Democrats. So we'll I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So welcome, Mr. John Ruddick. How are you, John?
Terrific. Thanks very much for having me, Pietro. G'day, Max.
Hi, John.
Absolute pleasure.
John, let's jump straight into it. So first question we normally ask our guests is your journey to libertarianism. How did you find, one, the Liberal Democrats, two, especially coming from the Liberal Party? Tell us about the shift.
Okay, so I was born in 1970. When I was 9 years old, the biggest political issue in the world for about a year and a half was the Iranian hostage crisis. And I was gripped by it. Okay, and I would sort of come home, and I lived in Tamworth. We had very limited news sources. We'd get like a Channel 7 from Sydney broadcast, and we'd get ABC, and we had newspapers. But I would sort of, I was very, very concerned about these Americans held hostage. And then my family was actually driving to Sydney on the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, and Ronald Reagan, the Ayatollah, let the Americans go, and I was very happy. Anyway, so but that had sort of got me hooked on news, the Iranian hostage crisis. And my father was a sort of a local journalist. So there was lots of newspapers and history books around the place. And then we were very sort of partisan liberals in our household. And this was the era of, we used to hear a lot more about Margaret Thatcher in the 1990s than we did Ronald Reagan. I think today people follow American news. Most Australians who are interested in politics know a lot more about American politics than they do about British politics. But I don't think that was the case in the 1980s. And we used to see a lot of Margaret Thatcher, like in the early years of Thatcher, there was a lot of street violence, the coal miners, and she was a very controversial figure. Then we had the Falklands War and everything. So we sort of grew up being pro-Thatcher, pro-Reagan, and pro the Liberal Party. And then I took a couple of years off school and worked on a sort of an outback station. And then just used to read a lot of books. There was a hell of a lot of time to waste, to kill. And then I thought, look, I'll go to university. And all I really wanted to study was history. So I did an arts degree at Sydney University. And my father had mentioned to me once or twice about Ayn Rand. And he just sort of casually said once, he said, look, if you ever see a book by Ayn Rand, she's worth a read. And that was really the full extent of my father's telling me about Ayn Rand. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Now, then about a year later, so this is 1992, there was an article in the Australian newspaper, which I think was copied from the London Times or something, but it was called A Tribute to the Goddess of Capitalism. And I think it was the centenary of her birth, which, that would be about right, yes. And anyway, so I thought, oh yeah, Dad had mentioned about this lady, who I thought was pronounced Ayn Rand at the time. Anyway, so I went off to the Sydney University Library and I borrowed, I first read her non-fiction books. So she had become famous in the 40s with the Fountainhead, which was a pretty big deal, made her reasonably wealthy. But then she spent 10 years writing Atlas Shrugged, which was her magnum opus. But then in the 60s, I think she was a columnist for the New York Times for a period, maybe Newsweek or Time or something. And she turned a lot of these columns into books, and I read them, and I was just thought this is absolutely fantastic. And then I very carefully read Atlas Shrugged, which is a big book.
Yep.
Okay? It's about 1,200 pages of fine print, and she's not, William Shakespeare in terms of her literary skill. She sort of had to teach herself English, so it's not beautiful language. Okay, but it is. I find her to write like nobody else. She's sort of like, she writes like a machine gun. Okay, it's just very, very cutting and direct. And I was, absolutely 100% pro Ayn Rand. And people would tell me, John, you'll grow out of it. Well, I'm 52 now. I haven't grown out of it. I think she is in a category of her own. Now, also at university, I read Milton Friedman and Hayek and stuff. Now, those guys are great. But I used to explain to my friends at the time, I said, look, the difference between Ayn Rand and these great economists is that the Milton Friedmans of the world will say capitalism is good because it works, and here's the evidence that it works. And that's a good argument, okay? And that's a needed argument. But Ayn Rand says, look, obviously capitalism works. I don't even need to debate that. But capitalism is good because it is moral. It fits in with the natural human condition. And so I was absolutely sold on libertarianism as a result of that. Now, then in 1993, in March 1993, we had the Liberal Party put up the Fight Back package with John Hewson. Now, John Hewson was a very awkward politician. And it was, this is 10 years after a Labor government. Now, before Hawke had won 4 elections, no Labor Prime Minister had ever won more than 2. Okay, so the Labor Party has been a very unsuccessful political party in this country. If you compare since from Federation to today, so that's like 123 years or something, in that same period, the Republicans and the Democrats have held the White House almost for precisely the same amount of time. I think the Republicans might be 52 years, the Democrats, that's probably actually even now because of a couple of years of Biden. And in number 10 Downing Street, in the same period of time from Federation to today, in number 10 Downing Street, the Conservatives have held the number 10 for a very similar amount of time to what the Labor Party and the previous Liberal Party, which was sort of the leftist party at the beginning of a century ago. So they've been, these democracies are, very finely, balanced, which is probably not a bad thing. Okay, but in Australia, the non-Labor side of politics has run the federal government for about 75% of the time. But then Hawke comes along, and he won 4 terms, and then Keating had another one. But anyway, but the reason why Hawke was successful, look, Hawke did have a remarkably likable sort of personality. There's no doubt about that, which he was, that's what he was born with. But he also had it so easy because Thatcher brought in her reforms in 1979 with a hell of a lot of upheaval. And she sent the country into a recession at first. And that's when she famously said, we're not doing the U-turn, we're going to stick with it. Previous Conservative governments had done the U-turn. Okay, but then by the time Hawke comes to power in 1983, we've had 4 years of the Thatcher revolution has really started to bear fruit. And people can say, wow, great, inflation's down, rates are down, growth's up, everything good is up, everything bad is down. So Hawke basically, and Hawke, everyone in the Labor Party had remembered the schmozzle of the Whitlam government, the previous Labor government, and Hawke says in his memoirs, look, well, the one thing we're going to do is we're going to avoid the economic mistakes of the Whitlam government. So Hawke comes along, he didn't campaign on it, and he basically signed up to Thatcherism with a little bit watered down, a little bit, but not particularly around trade unions and the Accords, but he really did sort of settle the unions down. And so that's why Hawke had a good run, because he betrayed everything the Labor Party had ever stood for. That's what it was, okay, which they never admit that, but that is why he was successful. Anyway, but then the Liberal Party had lost 4 elections in a row, and their response in 1993 was the Fight Back package, which was, pure undiluted Thatcherism, really hardcore, okay? And everybody thought that Keating would lose, but in fact, Keating won. And so I was very pro-fight back. And so when they lost, I rang up the Liberal Party about 2 days later, said I would like to get involved with the Liberal Party. So then that was 1983. Now, I won't bore you with all the details of the Liberal Party, but look, I was basically trying to, to simplify things, there's the left faction and there's the right faction. Now, I thought the right faction, which I got heavily involved in, were basically people that held faith with fight backism, okay? But what has happened over the last 3 decades is really the liberal right has really become preoccupied, not with economics, but with social conservatism, okay? And I was sort of weirdly oblivious to that. I was thinking, look, when the right gets in control of government, they're going to do basically Thatcherism, fight backism, okay? But then we've had just had this pretty useless 10-year federal government of the Liberal Party, and and what really sort of made me totally give up faith that the Liberal Party can ever be rehabilitated was when COVID comes along, and we had the debt that when Howard left office, there was $20 billion in federal government debt, which is just a rounding error for a very wealthy country like Australia. Then after 6 years of Rudd and Gillard, it's gone up to $256 billion. And Abbott and Hockey in opposition were saying, oh, this is a scandal, this is the worst thing ever, this debt is out of control. And I can remember saying to friends at the time, I said, look, it's not good that we've got this debt, but let me assure you, $250 billion is not much of a problem for a very wealthy country like Australia. It'd be better if we had no debt, but it's not terrible. So don't think that it's going to be a catastrophe. But this is what Abbott and Hockey did. They tried for political gain. Then they come into office, and before COVID, and 3 Liberal Party prime ministers later, for some strange reason, the debt's gone up to about $560 billion. Now that's starting to get to the point where it is a problem, okay, where it's going to sort of bog down the country. And it was not like we had a war or anything, okay? So it was just, they just couldn't cut spending. They couldn't.
And not only that, but like the trend is the thing that's the most dangerous there. Yes. Is that rather than, okay, maybe it's not super dangerous yet, but the idea that we are not going against the debt, we're actually increasing it despite being the party that's supposed to decrease it. That's the more alarming trend, I'd say.
Absolutely. No, that's well said. The thing is, yes, these are meant to have been, these are the people that market themselves as the sane economic managers. But this is before COVID, it gets to 560 billion. Then COVID comes along, and I'm absolutely convinced Australia went down the extreme COVID road more than most other countries, because remember, just before COVID, Scott Morrison had that dreadful run politically over the bushfires. Now, I do not have a high regard for Scott Morrison, but the abuse he copped over the bushfires was absolutely unfair. Okay, Australia is going to have a really bad bushfire once every 2 decades, roughly. It's going to happen. There's plants out there that can only release their seed if there's a really bad bushfire. That's how naturally part of the landscape it is. And why blame Morrison on it? He can't stop it. Okay, anyway. But he sort of was really, really hurting about those bushfires, wrongly in my view. Then COVID comes along and he thought, oh, fantastic, this is the best diversion ever. I'm Winston Churchill. I'm out the front of the country. I'm at the helm saving the nation. Okay. And so then, the debt just, before you know it, the debt's on its way to $1 trillion. Now, John Howard came out and said more than once, he says, oh, who cares about the debt? This is a once in a century crisis. It was just, these people were whipped up by this hysteria. It was so obvious in early 2020 that this bad version of the flu was badly dangerous for people over the age of 70. And for the rest of us, it was just a normal flu. That data has held all the way through. So, if we wanted to take extreme measures, okay, well, let's do it for people who are actually vulnerable, not wreck up the whole country. Anyway, so they got it to $1 trillion. So we had, under Morrison, we had the debt out of control. We had the COVID police state, which was just, abhorrent. and then we had the total sellout on global warming. Okay, and so I know Morrison was useless, but where was the so-called right wing of the Liberal Party that I thought was sort of trying to bring about at least a form of libertarian type of government? There was barely a soul on that backbench that did not just sit back and say, oh yeah, whatever, yeah, this is all fine. So that's what I thought. Now a couple of them did. Craig Kelly spoke out and they cut his head off. And then Senator Rennick later on in the process did speak out valiantly, and good on them. Okay, but I mean, basically, you know, they've been ostracized by the party, not kicked out. And George Christensen, you know, he spoke about out against all the BS, and you know, he basically got decapitated as well. Okay, so I thought, okay, well, what hope is there for the Liberal Party? And I said, look, there is no hope. They have failed these three tests. All political parties make bad mistakes, but I mean, they failed these three fundamental tests. So I was, this was sort of mid-2021, and it was a long weekend, and I just said to my wife, look, I'm going to go for a drive around the country with our two little daughters, just to sort of, you know, just to get away. And I just sort of spent those 3 days thinking, what am I going to do? Then I stayed at a mate's farm, and then I wake up on Sunday morning, I watch The Outsiders on Sky News, which, you know, I usually do. It's a magnificent show. And David Limbrick's on there. I'd never heard of David Limbrick, okay? And David Limbrick's on the, Rita Panahi introduces him as the real leader of the opposition in Victoria, because of course the Liberal Party in Victoria totally sold out to all the crap, you know. They could have taken a principled stand, okay? And then so I heard David Limbrick and I said, oh, well, great. I said, I'll ring up the Liberal Democrats. And I just rang them up straight away. I said, look, you know, well, my friend Ross Cameron had sort of had a little bit of a discussion with him, and his son was involved. I rang up Ross's son, Dougal. I said, are you still involved with the Liberal Democrats? He said, yeah. I said, well, look, I'd like to join you, and I'd like to be your candidate for the seat that I almost live in, a couple of blocks away. Warringah, which was Tony Abbott's old seat, and Zali, the amazing Zali's seat. And I thought I can really help this little party if I run in Tony's seat, Zali's seat, because I knew, having known the Liberal Party branch, that they would have a huge shit fight over who would be their candidate against Zali. I could see that coming, and I thought, okay, I'll get out there early as a Liberal Democrat. I will make some noise. I will say the Liberal Party is useless. And yeah, I was hoping to get 5 to 10% of the vote or something, okay, to help the party, okay. And then so we announced that I was running for Warringah, which, you know, got a bit of attention. And then I went to, only about a month into that, I went to an illegal freedom march, which was an enormous amount of fun, and all these good people. But I come home and my Twitter has, like, it's had 8 million impressions of people just saying that John Ruddick is the Antichrist and he's going to bring COVID back to the North Shore of Sydney. And so then the Liberal Democrats said to me, oh, well, everybody seemed to hate my guts, okay? From Kevin Rudd down onwards. Lots of people at News Limited saying, oh, what a disgraceful person that John Ruddick is. Everybody seemed to hate it except for the Liberal Democrats. They said, oh, John, we think it's fantastic. So then they said, would you like to run for the Senate? And I said, well, look, obviously we're not going to win the Senate. Can you please try and find somebody who might win it? Because I don't think I will win it. But anyway, they came back to me and they said, no, John, we'd like you to be. So that's how I ended up as the Senate candidate at the last federal election.
While we're talking about factions, before we jump into what's happened in New South Wales the last few months, do you think it's healthy for parties to have factions and have, like, opposing sides and groups within?
Absolutely. It's absolutely naturally part of the political process. It's just what's going to happen, because who gets involved in politics? You know, big mouths and people with big opinions. Okay, so, you know, now the left certainly seem to be able to contain their internal divisions more, because they sort of are more like sort of sheep-like. Well, and this is what the problem in the sort of the Liberal Party. The left of the Liberal Party were sort of like a machine. Where there was like 1 or 2 chiefs and lots of Indians. In the right of the Liberal Party, there was lots and lots of chiefs and not enough Indians. And certainly in libertarianism, there's a lot of chiefs and not many Indians. But that's because we're all passionate about ideas, and it's a natural thing, yes.
And we all think we're right.
Absolutely. Yes.
We all know we're right.
Yeah, sorry, we all know we're right. I just wanted, so it was interesting that you mentioned that the Labor Party with Hawke to initially get into power against the Grain, because obviously they seem to not be in power for a long time, kind of had to veer to a version of conservatism to achieve this. Whereas what I'd say is happening now is that the right-wing party, the Liberal Party, is having to veer further towards progressivism to try and get into power. So why do you think that shift has occurred? When did that happen? I think that's quite interesting to me.
You know, John Roscombe at the IPA wrote a very, very interesting opinion piece about 2 years ago, and he said in the 1980s, the Liberal Party set the opposition, even though they were they set the agenda despite being in opposition, and that the Labor Party was in government, but basically governed as the Liberal Party had its principles had historically wanted them to do. And he said that this last Liberal federal government we had was the total opposite. The Labor Party's agenda, despite the Labor Party being in opposition, it was their agenda that was setting the agenda of the government. So what this actually tells us is that with weak political leadership, the politicians will basically just go along with, they'll go with the flow, what they see as the sort of the mainstream media narrative. Okay, and so it sort of says that there's now you need once in a generation a great leader comes along who does sort of who does defy the orthodoxy and can convince the people to come with them on that way. But the interesting thing about more specifically about your question, the 1980s were great, because of great leaders. It wasn't just Thatcher and Reagan. We had a very good Pope. Okay, the Soviet leader was better than the rest of them. Gorbachev. The Chinese leader was pretty good. Deng Xiaoping, very pro-free market. Helmut Kohl. And even in Canada and New Zealand, the 1980s had good leaders all around the world, left and right parties. Now it's the opposite today. It's the total opposite today. Every leader is crap around the whole world. Okay, there's not one that we can look up to who's in a position of national influence who's any good. Now, but what set the 1980s to be such a magnificent period was the intellectual battles of the 1970s, where people like Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman became household names. And they would go on these really big shows in America, like the Phil Donahue show, which was sort of like the Oprah of the time, but a very, very big influential show. And they would repeatedly have Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand on. And these ideas were being discussed and sort of convinced you got to win the philosophical battle before you win the political battle. Now, what's happened in reverse here is, why is the world so shit now? Okay, well, I truly believe the turning point was the Iraq War. Okay, in that that disgraced the right. That's what happened. Okay, so I was a big supporter of it. Okay, and I look back and I'm ashamed that I was. But that's after 9/11. America felt as though there had to be retribution, okay? And there did have to be retribution against the goddamn Taliban in Afghanistan, okay? And they went into Afghanistan and they knocked over that government in 6 weeks, and that was the right thing to do. Now, in retrospect, what they should have done is, when they had full control of Afghanistan, and they got the full force of the US military coming down on this very poor little remote country, and the whole world was on board with it. The Chinese were fine with it. The Russians were fine with it. Everyone was saying, 9/11 was a bad thing. Then George Bush, I think, with good intentions, I mean, there's no oil in Afghanistan, obviously. I think he really thought, well, look, we obliterated Germany, we obliterated Japan, we rebuilt them into great liberal democracies, and they have been successful countries by and large. They thought, let's do the same thing in Afghanistan. Okay, well, what they should have done is they should have gone, there was a military group in Afghanistan, that the Northern Alliance, which were opposed to the Taliban. They should have said to the Northern Alliance, they should have said, look, here's a ton of guns and weapons, here's a ton of cash, you run the joint, okay? But unfortunately, we're there for 20 years and it just became a hellhole. And who's running it now again? The Taliban. But anyway, after Afghanistan, after the initial 6 weeks, Bush then says, well, let's go and do what Daddy couldn't do. Let's go and knock off Saddam. Now, then, and then all this crap about weapons of mass destruction. Okay, and it was pretty, and obviously it had nothing to, Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11. So then what happens is, Bush just concocts a story to go into Iraq. It turns into the bloodbath that was, first the insurgency in Iraq, but then bloody ISIS, and all the misery, all the extreme suffering, all caused by George W. Bush and John Howard and Tony Blair and their stupidity. And then by sort of 2006, 2007, when that war is going to hell and lots of Americans are getting killed and everything, the media and the left and the middle massively turned on the right. And that's how we ended up with Barack Obama, who was the first president since Franklin Roosevelt, who was from the left of the Democratic Party. And Obama, at face value, Obama didn't do anything too radical. Yes, Obamacare, okay, and he was basically a leftist, but he lost control of Congress after the first 2 years anyway, so he couldn't do that much. But where Obama really fundamentally re-engineered America was in the administrative state. So the president gets to appoint a lot of people, and just very quietly, didn't make the news, but just one appointment after another, sort of 3-4 levels down in important institutions like the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Defense, Education, the Justice Department, the whole flaming lot of it. He put in hardcore left-wing activists. And that's how we end up with, the mess we're in the United States right now.
I gotta disagree a little bit on, so your assertion is that after 9/11, the initial response by the US to go into Afghanistan was somewhat justified, but I'd say that that was at the same time that they introduced the Patriot Act, which still exists, which allows them to spy on citizens, and it's kind of the first really big state spy apparatus on its own citizen legislation passed, and it was passed in that period of fear and terror and very much manipulating what the people were feeling after 9/11, which was horror and all of that. And I don't know, does that not suggest that perhaps even before 9/11 the state and the right were kind of already prepared to take a bigger step in expanding beyond reasonable terms, even before Obama and the left, which the left perfectly openly advocates for a bigger state? They don't even have to hide it. But that was kind of a bit of a betrayal. Would you not agree?
Oh, look, in retrospect, look, I mean, I can remember being scared that there would be, about every 9 months after 9/11, this is before, up until they killed Osama. So for about 10 years, about every 9 months, there was a big dramatic attack on the West. Bali, Madrid, London, others, okay. And others they attempted to do it, okay. So when Bush comes out with the Patriot Act and everything, I was looking back, and I was absolutely wrong. I was saying, look, this is a one-off. We've got people here that could drop a nuke on us. If they could drop a nuke on Sydney or Melbourne, they would. So I thought, we need to do this as a one-off. Now, there were voices like Ron Paul, Rand Paul, David Leyonhjelm in this country, who said, hang on. We're building this apparatus and there's no plan to dismantle it. And, are you really saying that they're just going to not use this apparatus after it's been put in place? So it's been put in place for the emergency of the day. And I can remember thinking, no, these guys are wrong because this is a one-off emergency. But then, of course, we find out when COVID comes along, the apparatus is still there and it's turned on the heretics, the COVID heretics, the people who are saying, that this is BS. So that only demonstrates that the libertarians are basically right on everything, on every major public policy issue. They get it right at the time. Like another great example is the subprime crisis bailout. Okay. It was just unbelievable. Who was against that? The Tea Party, Ron Paul, Rand Paul, all the good guys were saying we should let these bad Wall Street banks crash. it may well trigger a sharper recession than we would otherwise have, but then we wouldn't have all this debt and we would have rebounded with strength.
Yeah, and we're just going to have the recession somewhere further along the road, and it'll be much, much bigger, which is something we can all look forward to now.
Exactly, and then we've gone and doubled the COVID, the subprime debt for stupid COVID. Yes, so we've got great leadership in the world right now.
Yeah. So why don't we veer away from the US for a little bit, because we've actually got something way more topical to talk about, and that's specifically what's happening here in Australia. And before we talk about your campaign and hopefully your election next month, we had a bit of internal factional fighting in New South Wales. Those followers of ours who are Liberal Democrats, I'm sure, would love to hear a little bit more of the story. So if you don't mind, could you tell us what exactly the hell happened in New South Wales over the last 2 months?
Okay, well, there is this libertarian paradox, which is that we're a registered political party in the Liberal Democrats, and that means that there is paperwork and administrative work and regulatory rules to follow. So we need an executive to sort of administer the party. But the paradox is that running for an executive goes against all the instincts of a libertarian. They don't believe in centralised power. So it's sort of like the last thing they want to do. In the Liberal Party, in the Labor Party, in the Greens, people clamour to be on the executive because they want the prestige, okay? The Libertarians, it's the last thing they want to do. But we still need to have an executive. So what we had is last May, we had an election for the state executive. And a majority of and there's 7 members of the executive. Now, a majority of these people elected were people who most of them were very new to the party. They just sort of, one way or another accidentally found themselves in the party, and they were enthusiastic, and that's great. And some of them had, some pretty impressive private sector experience. So we thought, and they wanted to do it. So we said, okay, fantastic, you be the state executive. And so then the membership understood that they were being elected to do the admin that no one else wanted to do. Okay. But then very quickly it morphed into they would, as libertarians know, with centralized authorities, they're sort of, there's mission creep. Okay. And people start to enjoy their power. And so then we did convince them that for this coming state election, where we've got a reasonable chance of winning, that we should have a democratic vote for who our candidate is amongst all the membership. So this was in sort of September last year. Now, the state executive were very, very 50-50 about whether we should have this, because they wanted to appoint the candidate. But then they sort of thought, oh, well, we might be able to make some money out of it, and we'll absolutely stress to everybody it's a non-binding straw poll, because they will make the decision. Okay, now they are good people with good intentions, but the fact that they were having a non-binding straw poll where they did invite the members, but then they were going to sort of do whatever they want, it was from the very beginning, Pietro and Max, a recipe for a car crash. Okay, because you've asked the members what they want, and then if we defy them, there's going to be a problem. Okay, so we had the members vote, the non-binding straw poll in September, which I encouraged a couple of other people to run. I encouraged John Humphries to run, who's the founder of our party and who just lives over the border in Queensland. And I encouraged Ross Cameron to run. And I also encouraged the party. I said, we should advertise for candidates. Okay, we should say, blast it out on social media, or even put an ad in the Financial Review. Do you want to be the Liberal Democratic candidate for the New South Wales Upper House? Now, we'll start, if you're a non-member, I was thinking we should charge them $2,000 to nominate. Now, we might have got half a dozen people, so that would have been good for revenue, but also maybe there would have been a real star step forward. Maybe someone who was a senior executive at BHP or something, who says, look, I really believe in libertarianism. I haven't been a member of the party because of my job, but I'm 60 now and I'd like to give it a go. So we might have, but just making it a democratic and transparent process, and really wanting anyone possible to step up. But anyway, so we had a vote in September, and I was a candidate, and we won that first member straw poll I got about 68% of the vote. Now that was, so then the state executive were, they sort of ummed and ahed for a couple of weeks, but after a couple of weeks, they told me, okay, John, we will now endorse you as a candidate. We don't really care about the straw poll, but we will. But if the straw poll had been closer, I don't think they would have endorsed me, but they were
forced to.
That's right. But then they absolutely rammed it down my throat. They're saying, John, we will set the strategy. We will set the policies. You will do the fundraising and you will go to the events that we organise for you to go to. I was like, okay. So I sort of thought, okay, well, we'll see how this goes. And then I find out just very quickly after that that the 3 campaign themes were going to be community, integrity, prosperity.
Oh, yuck. Like, they could just as easily be the 3 buzzwords for any other party ever. Like, there's nothing distinctive about that whatsoever.
Thank you. So at that point, I thought to myself, okay, well, look, we can have a war here, or I can just sort of accept it and not cause a war. But then I thought, if we do that, and by the time the membership finds out that we're campaigning on community, integrity, and prosperity, they're going to say to me in sort of February, in the weeks leading up to the election, they're going to say, John, why didn't you do something about this? Okay. And I then had to say to the executive, or to the slim majority in the executive, who just lacked political experience. They had good intentions and they wanted the best outcome for the party, but they truly believed that they thought that the way for a little party to go from 2% to sort of 4% was to be vague and inoffensive and not to use terms that would upset people. I said, look, I don't even support that strategy for a major party who's trying to get 51%, but I could accept that why people do that, okay, but a minor party's got to get noticed, and they don't care about upsetting the majority. We actually want to appeal to the intelligent base.
We spoke about this on the last episode. We mentioned the bold libertarians. We spoke about being bold, and we're not here to be populists.
That's right.
Like just get the message out there, win the people who believe what we believe in. We're not trying to win 100% of the vote.
It's such a strange thing for libertarians. Like, we hold this philosophy and these ideas which are so radical in the modern world. Like, they're completely against the direction that the world is going in terms of just like expanding states everywhere, expanding public sector, government, do everything. We have the opposite radical idea that we should shrink government drastically. And how are these people then going with a mild, inoffensive strategy to try and campaign? Like, we're radicals. You can't hide the fact that we're radicals. What's the point in that? Sorry, go on.
I agree entirely with what you both said. And the thing is, I reckon if everybody in Australia knew exactly what we believe in, I think we'd get 10% of the vote. But immediately. But I think there's another 10% on top of that who are easily persuadable, who wouldn't take them too much effort. Okay. So the question is, how do we? Our biggest challenge is people knowing we exist.
Yeah.
Because when they do know I would say 8% of Australians know who the Liberal Democrats are, but we've got about 2.5% of Australians are voting for us. So out of the people that know we exist and the votes we get, it's actually pretty high. Okay. Yeah. So we just got to, now, how are we going to get recognition? We're going to throw a few punches. Okay. We're not going to talk about community, prosperity, and integrity. Okay. So we had a very, very, very painful couple of months where I was trying to explain to them, this is a losing strategy. But I would just get howled down and I would just be told that I'm rude, and because I'd point out that they lacked experience, and it was just a very bitter couple of months, very painful. And then what happened was on Boxing Day, relations were terrible, but on Boxing Day, with 1 minute to go, there was a notice put on the executive of the state, on the agenda of the state executive, saying that John Ruddick shall be disendorsed. And they had numbers to disendorse me by 4-3. Okay, and I was, so then we thought, well, what are we going to do about that? So we had 2 options. Option 1 was to appeal to the national executive, but the national executive had indicated that they sort of wanted the state divisions to sort out their own problems. So the second option was to have a grassroots up, campaign. So we knew that in the bylaws it said that if 25% of the membership signs the petition to spill the executive, that we can do this. But remember, this is only the 27th of December. Okay, this is when everybody is in, switch off mode if they're not overseas or whatever. Okay, so I thought it'll take us a week to get to the 25%. But we launched this petition of Cameron Shamsabat, who was one of the good guys on the executive, who didn't vote to expel me or disendorse me. We got this 25% in 24 hours. We thought, well, that's fantastic. Okay, that's fantastic. And so then that triggered a special general meeting. So in that campaign, I was wisely advised at the beginning, saying, John, we know that you like to sort of throw punches and stuff, but you should just try to stay out of this. There's going to be a lot of backwards and forwards on Basecamp, on the Facebook groups, on other places. Just try and be statesman-like above it. I said, it'll be hard, but I'll try. And so, but look, there's this paradox about the Liberal Democrats, or the Libertarians in general, where they don't want to serve on an executive. But the other side of the coin is that if there is a tyrannical centralized power, which is overstepping the mark, and it needs to be overthrown, then libertarians come into their own. They are fantastic in that situation. So there's the good and the bad. The bad is they don't want to serve an executive. The good is, if there's a tyranny to overthrow, they'll grab the pitchforks and they'll go and they'll fight hard. So then we had the state executive, the special general meeting last Saturday, and it was the biggest meeting in the history of the New South Wales division, at least. I think there's about 230 people there, either in person or online. And we had a second vote for who the candidate would be, and I won 77% of the votes. So the vote went up. Okay, and then we had a vote for the state executive, and basically the bold libertarian ticket won 5 or 6 positions out of 7, and only one of the people that voted to disendorse me got re-elected. Okay, so basically,
single person still on the executive. So it's out of the 7 on the executive initially.
Yes.
Was there only one person that got re-elected?
One, yes.
And 6 new faces.
That is correct. Oh, right. Well, there was 2 people who were.
Okay.
Remember 3 voted to not disendorse me.
Yeah.
And yes, well, 2 of them stood for re-election and 2 of them won comfortably. Okay. Yes. So look, the New South Wales Liberal Democrats are under new management, under the bold libertarian management. Now, I said what I wanted to campaign on was, how the standard political textbook says, you should just talk about 3 things. Well, I want to throw the standard political textbook out of the window. I want to talk about 5 things. I want to talk about capitalism, coal, cuts, COVID justice, and a colourblind society. Okay, now, so with all these things, yes, we're trying. I mean, these are all things we believe in, and these are things that the majority will probably find offensive. Nobody since Thatcher has really, no political leader has come out in a big way since Thatcher and says, point blank, capitalism is good. Okay, well, of course capitalism is good. In my lifetime, it's lifted up 1 billion or 2 people out of absolute frigging poverty.
Yeah.
So why can't we be pro-capitalism? Now, on coal, I know that our party position has always been twofold, which is saying we don't want to give any special benefits to any particular form of energy. We want all energy sources to compete in a free market, and we want the government to get the hell out of the energy market. Okay, so that's what our position has been, and that's what my position is as well. However, I did want to give a shout out to coal in a big way, because we got a catastrophe unfolding before our eyes. If we look at California and Europe, and energy prices are going through the roof. Australia has got about 1,000 years of proven reserves of coal. There's just like a ton. We're not even looking for it. There's so much out there, and so we have to be pro the coal industry as a matter of there's an emergency, and people who aspire to political leadership should be saying, we're pro coal.
It's also handy that coal starts with a C and it fits in nicely with your other 4C word.
Don't forget community.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yes. That's right. Yeah, the 5 C's. And look, the other ones are, we want to talk about what we came up with the term COVID justice. Now, the previous state executive had just said repeatedly, oh, John, everyone's moved on from COVID. Don't talk about COVID. It's old news. It's just for cookers. Okay, whatever. But the thing is, now they are right that I believe 70% of people out there do not want to think about COVID anymore. Okay, they probably had the silly jab, and they just don't want to think about it. However, as libertarians, we surely have a responsibility to correct the greatest, infringement on civil rights since 1788 in this country. Okay, and if we're just going to sweep it under the carpet, no, there has to be COVID justice. Now, on the and part of COVID justice is understanding, having transparency and truth about this issue of COVID vaccine injuries. Now, I don't know. I'm a history student. I don't know the extent of it. I know that even the official statistics are saying that the overall deaths in all the countries that took a lot of mRNA is up about 20%, including in this country. Heart attacks are surprisingly up. Now, is it related to the COVID vaccine? I've got a hunch it is, but I mean, it's barely a hunch, okay? Because I mean, I don't understand this stuff, but I do know that some of the people that got deplatformed, people like Dr. Peter McCulloch and Jay Bhattacharya, I know that these people who got deplatformed said 2 years ago, and Robert Malone, they said 2 years ago, mRNA may well cause heart problems. And now we've got heart problems, okay? So, and of course, we all know the people that got deplatformed in history, well, not the people that were wrong. If they are wrong, they'll just be ignored. The people that got deplatformed, like I'm talking about the last 2,000 years or more, were always the good guys. It was always, when they were burning heretics at the stake, those heretics were liberal-minded, free-thinking people who the church said, oh, they're evil bastards, okay? If they were just wrong, they would have been left alone. So, yes, well, I want to talk about COVID justice. Now, if the vaccines are not causing these injuries, quite possible, the lockdowns, it's a hangover from the lockdowns, okay? That's the other thing that's causing the spike in the deaths. It's one or the other. It was either, the bad health consequences of locking everyone down, or it's the bad health consequences of the vaccine. So one way or another, the COVID maniacs are responsible for all this crap. Then, of course, we've got the debt as a result of COVID. So, we got in the Atlantic magazine published a thing about 3 months ago saying we need a COVID amnesty. Well, they can stick that COVID amnesty where the sun doesn't shine. No, COVID justice is what we're going to talk about. We want to talk about cuts. Now, the previous state executive, who I want to repeat, were good people with good intentions. They said, John, cuts doesn't get you any votes. Cuts doesn't get you any votes. I said, look, 10% of people will get it. We've got all this debt. When the Liberal Party came to power in New South Wales in 2011, the Labor Party handed over $8 billion in state government debt, which is, that Bob Carr government, similar to the Steve Bracks government, actually, was a Labor government, right-wing Labor, and, in retrospect, they didn't do much, but they didn't do much bad either, basically. Now we've got left-wing Labor governments, okay, like Dan Andrews and Jacinda Ardern, we know how much damage they can do. But anyway, after the Bob Carr government, Morris Yem or whatever, $8 billion in New South Wales, very modest debt. Okay, now under the amazing leadership of the Liberal Party, it's about $80 billion. Half of it's related to stupid COVID, of course, and it's on its way to about $114 billion. So that's in addition to the state government. So we need to talk about cuts. We need to talk about cutting government services in a big, big way. Okay, and that's the truth. That's what we need. We're the only political party that's going to get out there and say that uncomfortable truth. And we want to talk about a colourblind society, because this this positive racism, okay, so I see the sort of the high watermark of race relations in the West was Martin Luther King's speech where he said, look, let's judge people by their character, not the colour of their skin. Who can argue with that? And it was sort of that was sort of the end of what we'll call overt racism, discriminating against people in a bad way because of the colour of their skin. But then after Martin Luther King, they sort of said, oh, well, look, maybe we need a little bit of affirmative action just to correct the wrongs of the past. Okay, so we'll make it easier for some people to get into university because of the colour of their skin. So they just opened the door a little bit to positive racism. And that little bit has now turned into this flood of race consciousness, which is appalling, which hurts the people that they're trying to help. That's what I truly believe it does. It hurts them. And so all this, welcome to country shoving down our throat and, flags over the Harbour Bridge, And it's when there's one thing that's worked for all humans, if they want to sort of pick themselves up and have a successful life, and that is self-reliance and caring about the future more than the past. Okay, most human beings out there barely know anything about their great-grandparents. They barely would have one or two documents, then they would know their name and maybe where they were born and where they died. So that's your great-grandparents. So I mean, and everyone's got like 8 great-grandparents. Okay, now those people, they are of interest to the individual, just incidentally, just sort of out of curiosity. But there's no way on earth that your great-grandparents should determine your decisions about your life beyond the, you know. And so this race obsession, this positive race obsession, is saying that somebody's life, you know, their future is going to be determined by the experience of their ancestors. Now, it's just a curse to believe that. And, you know, I think the Liberal Democrats need to take a stand on that issue.
Yeah, well, how many people are there who, you know, were raised by shitty parents or, you know, had shitty upbringings? Like, it's the most inherent truth that they know from, you know, day one of becoming an adult is I want to be better than that. Like, it goes to get everyone who's in that position, which I'm not, but I know lots of people who are. They all know that instinctively. Like, if you dig just a little bit below, like the moralizing and the virtue signaling and the high horse on a pedestal stuff, like that's super obvious.
If you've had a difficult childhood, the chances of you becoming an extraordinary success are higher.
Yeah,
that is the truth. So if you've had a difficult big start to life, you should embrace it. And you should say, this has toughened me up. And you read the biographies of most of the great people in history. Most of them had some massive trauma before the age of 20, one description or another. And they learned from it and it made them tougher. So if people have had difficulties, they should not sit around and moan about it. They should say, this is great. This is going to make my life stronger and more successful.
I curse my parents every day for being really loving and for raising me in a household with everything I could ever want. Just every day. What fucking assholes. Sorry, you go, Max.
I was going to say, just going back to the cuts, it's funny how this has become a dirty word. Even at the Victorian state election that just passed, there was Labor advertising, or not Labor advertising, the anti-Liberal advertising, and it had a picture of Matthew Guy, and it said, Matthew Guy, the cuts guy. And I couldn't work out if that was pro-Liberal or anti-Labor. Sorry, or anti-Liberal. I just couldn't work it out because is that really a bad thing, calling him the cuts guy? I mean,
yeah,
that's out of control.
Every time I drove past one of those, I was like, sweet, that'd make me vote for him. I wish he was the cuts guy. The problem was that he wasn't the cuts guy.
Yeah. Look, the Liberal Party, you know, you look like they went hard left in Western Australia, got wiped out. Hard left in South Australia, wiped out. Well, not wiped out, but they lost office after one term, which is, you know, pretty shameful and it's very rare to lose after one term. And then in Victoria, you know, Matthew Guy, you know, basically being 90% as Dan Andrews, and he's thinking that 10% difference is going to win me over voters. It was just pathetic. And then Dom Perrottet, who I know quite well, and when I knew him very well 10 years ago, he would have loved to be on your show, okay, and you would have loved him on your show. And in fact, if Dom Perrottet became the finance minister in about 2014, and he was asked to speak at the Sydney Institute with Gerard Henderson and everything. And I was texting people at the time. I said, "Gee, this guy sounds like Ayn Rand." And he was even talking about transferring the taxation powers for income tax and company tax away from the federal government to the state governments. And that'd be just a magnificent thing. And we've got a big thing in our Freedom Manifesto about that. But this guy was like bone dry on economics. Okay, now he's always been a conservative Catholic, so there's be some things where he's not that libertarian. Okay, but basically, 99% of legislation is about spending money. It's about economics. Okay, so Dom was very, very good. Now it's the old saying, power corrupts. Yeah, and there's very few examples in history where people have not been corrupted by power. And this is why the Liberal Democrats just believe it. Look, let's just make the government a hell of a lot smaller so the corruption can be a hell of a lot smaller. That's basically, well, it's not like, we don't want to sort of we don't want to use the state to bring about right-wing policies. We don't want to use the state to bring about left-wing policies. We just want to make the state a lot smaller and things will be a lot better. But it's so, and then we got Matthew Guy, it was just, appalling, but now they're going to do it again. And so when you think about it, Scott Morrison did the same thing. So there's 5 Liberal attempts at trying to, I'm really left-wing, and they're going to get their head kicked in. So Ron DeSantis is the model, obviously.
Yeah, so let's stick to Dom a little bit, because I am curious and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I do agree with you 100% that the power corrupts, but with Dom, it almost seemed like that happened overnight from him being Berejiklian's deputy to being in power. Do you think it was purely a case of power corrupting, or do you think that once he became premier, he realized that actually whoever is the premier is just hamstrung behind the scenes? And really, he didn't actually have any chance to be who he was, or did he truly sell out once he got into that position?
It's a real mystery. In fact, no, I can't think of anyone who's disappointed me more in politics.
Yeah.
Tony Abbott, I never had my hopes up for him as the Prime Minister, because, he was basically a B.A. Santa Maria guy. Now, he's a good bloke, Tony Abbott, and he's got a really good heart and everything, and he's highly intelligent, but he was never one of us. He was never a believer in cutting the size of the government. He just wanted to redirect the government for something else. But Dom Perrottet was one of us, okay? Now, when he first became the premier, he led the way on opening the lockdowns and letting the people like myself, the unvaxxed, out of prison. And Scott Morrison and Dan Andrews followed Dom. Dom said, we're going to let the unvaxxed out, and then the others just sort of went along with it. So it is an interesting question. When did he go bad? Look, I think that he got into politics too young. And I think that he's got like about 6 or 7 kids. Okay. Now, I think that the trappings of office become sort of mesmerizing. I mean, it is a big deal to be the premier, because you've obviously got really flash office, and you've got really, you've got highly intelligent staff around you, and the whole media wants to talk to you. And wherever you go, you're the VIP, and you give a speech and everyone wants to shake your hand. And it just very quickly, people start to take the view, wow, this is just fantastic. I'm bigger than a movie star. I mean, being the premier of a big Australian state is a big deal. It's like, it's not nothing. And I just think that just sort of mesmerizes them. And they just think, okay, I want this for as long as I can get it.
Yeah.
I want to get re-elected. So I don't want the press to attack me. So I'm going to put that race-based flag over the Harbour Bridge, and I'm just going to sell out on everything. Then the media will be like me. Then I'll get re-elected. I think that's what happened. Now, the more generous view is with Dom and his sellout is that he wants to govern bolder, but if he did, he'd get rolled by his party room.
Yeah.
But I sort of, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. He was very disappointing. Like, it was an overnight shift, I remember, from what the voices of what he was doing as a deputy to then when he became premier and basically towed the line exactly the same.
I think this can be a positive with your campaign in New South Wales, John, with the voting system there, is that you've got the whole state voting for you. You can be bold and, attract that crowd that you want. You don't have to think, okay, I've got this local area I've got to campaign to. You can just say, right, I've got the whole state. Let's be bold. Let's put our message out there. And you should have a lot of people emerging out of the woodwork and saying, this is who I want to vote for.
Especially if Dom is being so mild and, unimpressive.
Yeah. Look, you're right. You're right, Max. It is a good opportunity for us a statewide vote. And basically, if we get 2.5% of the vote, which is about 120,000 people, then I'm told that nobody has got that percentage of the vote and not won in the last several elections. Now, we got 2.12, so we got about 101,000 votes at the Senate election in New South Wales. But the UAP got 162,000 votes, and the UAP is not registered in New South Wales. And we were closely associated with the UAP, and I like the UAP. I meet UAP people all the time, and they are fantastic. Now, they are, generally speaking, just good people who were not previously politically engaged, and that the COVID mania sent them through the roof, and they joined Clive Palmer. But they are good people. So I'm pretty hopeful that we can get elected. Okay, and then in the New South Wales upper house, you're elected for 2 terms, 8 years. Okay, rightly or wrongly, that's what the rules are. So I would use that opportunity to simply amplify our message, and to as I said before, I'm convinced 10% are already want to vote for us. They just don't know we exist. If 10% of people read the introduction to libertarianism on silly old Wikipedia, they just read the first 2 paragraphs, they'd say, that's me. They'd say, that is me. Then there's another at least 10% where you just sort of need to sit down with them for 20 minutes, give them a Milton Friedman book, Capitalism and Friedman or something, and they'll say, yeah, okay, I'm sold, that's me. So this is what they're doing in New Zealand, the ACT Party. They went from, because of COVID, they went from 1 MP to 10, and they're on track to become the Deputy Prime Minister of the great little country New Zealand. Okay, that's going to be good publicity for us. And I've got cousins in New Zealand, and they tell me, they're not particularly political, but they tell me when sometimes these new parties have an influx of new members, it always blows up, always sort of, it goes to crap. But my relatives tell me, look, these ACT guys that have all come in, they're really impressive. They're smart people. They'd be just like the average Liberal Democrat, okay? Yeah. And so what's happening in New Zealand is a great opportunity. The National Party over there is just as weak as our Liberal Party, okay? But look, we're going to have the National Party Prime Minister. Well, this is if the polls hold, and I think they will. That's why Jacinta's failed. So we've got we're going to have a National Party Prime Minister in coalition with the ACT. That's a pretty good government.
Yeah, and thank God Jacinta has gone, finally, the tyrant that she is. You've kind of answered a question that I was really interested in hearing your thoughts on, which is what would be your role as a parliamentarian? Because I think we all know that in the current state of things, if you did get elected, your actual ability to sway anything would be so minimal in terms of legislation. But I think you said that you would use that platform to amplify. Do you think that is the role of a libertarian elected to parliament in our current way of things?
Well, look, if there's, you're exactly right. It's going to be not never, but it's going to be rare when I've got the balance of power in the upper house. Okay, and obviously I'll use that. It won't be complicated about which way I'm going to vote. Which vote is going to reduce the size of government the most. Yeah. Okay. So what am I going to do with that at 8 years? Well, I believe we can build a mass-based party. Okay. Now, how I'd like to do this is I would like to go and buy a big bus, one of those big campaign buses, which I think costs about $250,000. Put Liberal Democrat stuff all over it, or the Libertarian Party, whatever we're going to be called shortly. And then we announce there's 93 lower house electorates in New South Wales. We announced a Libertarian Party day in each of these 93 electorates over the course of 2 or 3 years. So we say, and we put out the agenda of where we're going to be well in advance. We say that we're going to be in Tamworth on the 24th of October. We're going to be in Parramatta on the 19th of July, whatever. And we say we're going to go to we'd promote it. Let's say we're having it in Tamworth. We'd promote it through social media, maybe an ad in the paper, whatever, letterbox drop. And we'd say, come along to the Tamworth Town Hall or the Tamworth pub. And we'll put $500 on the behind the bar for to come and have a beer. We just want half an hour of your time to make an address. And I'm thinking we probably play them 5 to 10 minutes of Milton Friedman, because he was just such a magnificent communicator. So we show them the best of Milton Friedman for 5 to 10 minutes. Myself would get up, or Ross Cameron would get up, or John Humphreys, or whoever, Rob Croup would get up and have a bit of an address. And then we'd say, okay, well, look, have a chat with us at the pub. This is what libertarians do. Talk about politics at the pub on a Saturday afternoon. So now, how many people will come along to if we promote it to each electorate? Now, I believe sometimes there will be 10 people, and I believe sometimes there will be 100 people. But the people that come along, there will be people in there that will become party activists, and that we can start to build a bit of a presence, a bit of infrastructure in each of the electorates across New South Wales. And then we just keep promoting the message. And then, I think that we can then at the next state election, we can win, 3 or 4 people in the upper house.
Well, it's almost like a permanent soft campaign you'd be running. And then when it comes time to hard campaign, you've already got boots on the ground. You've got people involved. You've got people who've heard of the party.
Well, that's right. We're like Leon Trotsky, the permanent revolution.
I'm telling everyone that you quoted Leon Trotsky on our podcast. That's
Oh well, look. Those Bolsheviks in the early days, they were evil bastards. No doubt, when they came to power, and their philosophy is evil. But their commitment to their cause, and they were highly intellectual. There is things you can learn about when you are a fringe movement, but you're convinced that you've got the right ideas, and we are convinced. We've got centuries to back us up. Where there's less government is, the happier the people are. Yes, so I will. I sometimes.
I'm kidding.
Trotsky is a fascinating character, no doubt about it.
Yeah, of course. I think we're close to the hour mark now. There is one last question that I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on, and so I have an impression, but I'd like to hear how you would describe it yourself. So, in the broad scope of like all the way from classically liberal to pure anarcho-capitalist, where exactly would you fit yourself in that? What exactly do you think is the ideal role of government, the ideal end game for libertarians?
Well, I would say that I'd be happy to be called a libertarian at this point, but I will admit, before I joined this little party, I was not aware there was the next level, which was anarcho-capitalism. Okay, and I have got to know several anarcho-capitalists. And when I first heard about it, I just thought, that is just so nuts. And that is just sort of, it's like second year university students just sort of trying to be the coolest. Okay. However, I have now spoken to ANCAPs a lot. I've listened to quite a few of their tape stuff. I have not read Murray Rothbard yet because I've been preoccupied with other things.
Oh, you should. You absolutely should.
I would now say I'm at the point where I am thinking about anarcho-capitalism a lot. Okay. And I'll have tough questions about how it would be applied practically. But when I ask people, they've always got a very, very compelling answer. Like for example, look, I mean, it's easy to say how would the police work, or the roads work, or the healthcare system work under an anarcho-capitalist society. That's all easy. But then we have things like, how do we intelligence agencies? Okay, now we probably don't like intelligence agencies much, but a country sort of does need to sort of know if Indonesia's preparing to invade us, etc. Okay, so, and defense forces and things like this. Okay, so, but there are good answers for all of these hard questions. So I feel like I'm on a slippery slope to anarcho-capitalism, and it's sort of sliding further. But I do feel a little awkward talking about it because I haven't read the books. Okay, and after this election, that is priority number one.
That's good enough for me. That's anything else from you, Max, before we wrap it up, or anything else that you wanted to say before you went, John?
No, I think we've covered around the grounds, gentlemen. I think we've had a good time. So,
yeah, perfect. I was going to say I could talk about the policies for about another hour and dissect them, but maybe we'll save that for after you're elected.
Sounds terrific.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, John and Max. If you don't already, please like us on Instagram, follow us on Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube. We will be posting a little bit more frequently now. I am back in the country. Apologies for the long delays to our 2.5 fans who have been anxiously awaiting at their preferred podcast station, waiting for our next episode. Thank you so much. We'll catch you all next time. See you later.